most people in the north now know, the infamous William Burke and William Hare, Burke and Hare the body snatchers, plied their trade in the northeast. And the numerous empty tombs in the graveyard of Trinity Church testifies to that. And they were not the only people called resurrectionists back then. There was money to be made from the dead, selling the newly dead corpses to surgeons so that they could fine-tune their craft. On one occasion, a young woman spurned by her lover decided to commit suicide off the cliffs at Hendon. She leapt and was smashed to death on the rocks. Yet even before the authorities could move her, a body snatcher had the body away on a cart and into the back room of a doctor in the town centre. Burke used to work at the docks in Sunderland. Some say he helped build the existing pier, whilst at night he was making real money from the deaths of others. But by the time they moved to Edinburgh, they decided that there were not enough people dying, so they started helping them on their way. This was the way of the snatcher. They would look for a homeless person, a traveller or a tourist passing through, and would presume they wouldn't be missed, and then kill them. The amount of bodies placed on the slab that were still warm, some of them were not even dead. During many an autopsy, the dead person would jump up screaming, and at that moment, the doctor usually decided to finish them off, rather than have to explain himself to the authorities. Drunks were the softest target. Buy a man a few beers, once he's sozzled, persuade him to move to the next inn or pub, and once outside, sit him on a gig. That's a small horse-drawn cart. Then they would smash his skull in with a tiny handheld billet club. It was rare that body snatching would make big headlines, although many churchyards hired staff armed with pistols and swords to guard the dead. Here we have a story from Sherburn, where there was a huge number of people who had little or no money at the time. So everyone was looking for a bargain or a way to turn a profit. Enter Walter Smith, a man of poor stock who had worked with a butcher and decided to strike out on his own. He persuaded a couple of Durham farmers to provide him with dead animals, and soon his shop was thronged with customers. He sold his meat cheaper than any other, and pretty soon he realized that he needed more. Other farmers in the area were making more profit selling to more expensive butchers, so refused to water down that profit by selling to Smith. And then one day, he spoke to a man called Mick Duffy, an Irishman who had links to body snatchers, providing transport for the cadaver. He said that he could get him an unlimited amount of pork. The only problem was that it would be a bit battered about. Thinking about his pocket first, Smith agreed to take it. Duffy knew that some of the local surgeons only wanted certain human body parts: arms, legs, heads, internal organs. And the rest would be dumped. And usually it was Duffy's job to get shot of it. So he started filleting human flesh, putting all the livers together, hearts and sacks full of human meat. Smith must have known, but if he did, he ignored it, choosing to specialize in the making of delicious mutton pies swimming in gravy. People were said to have travelled from as far as Carlisle, Berwick and York to taste a Smith's mutton pie. Based from a small house that he had transformed a front window into a counter on Front Street in Sherburn, he was coining a lot of money. Each month, Duffy was bundling the human bones into bags, filled them with stones and threw them into the sea late at night from the pier. This went on for almost 11 years, until one day a customer came back to his shop with a pie saying it was inedible. On closer looking at it, a human ear could clearly be seen in the meat. Miraculously, Smith talked his way out of it, saying that a young suckling pig had ears like that. But he was getting sloppy, and it was only a matter of time before he slipped up again. 3 months later, a doctor had been having his supper when his cook alerted him to something strange in his food. The mutton pie had the end of a penis, the glans or helmet perfectly cooked and soaked in gravy, but still completely recognizable as man's best friend. Once again, he tried to say it was a pig's appendage, but the doctor refused to be fooled. Smith then immediately cancelled his deal with Duffy and promptly went out of business. Smith was very bitter and told Duffy unless he cut him in, he would blow the whistle on him. 2 days later, Smith vanished, never to be seen again, with the presumption that he'd been topped and found his way to a surgeon's table on the way to becoming an exotic pie filling. There's no doubt that many in the Sherburn area had been turned into cannibals without their knowledge. Once more, all this ties in with a mysterious disappearance of a rather portly young girl from Mill Lane in Sherburn. Esme Bailey was a solidly made girl. Her family described her as big-boned, but she'd padded out thanks to gross overeating. Her family were desperate to find her and heard Smith say that she'd been seen heading up towards Sherburn Hill with a man. The man was almost certainly Duffy, so there seems little doubt that this girl, with a lot of meat on her, became lunch or evening meal. Yet so desperate they were to contact her, they brought in a spiritualist, Samuel Hood from Wetherby, and they held a séance the night before Halloween to contact their daughter. Now, this was more to discover if she was dead, or had she just run off with some secret lover. The séance was strange and reached a climax when Esme's mother, Grace Bailey, screamed, having seen her daughter covered in blood staring at her. And at that moment, things in the house began to move. An ornament chinked with the ornament next to it. Shadows moved swiftly across the room, and then a strange silence. They strained their ears to hear anything. Then they knew there was something there. But it was really, really quiet. They listened, and there, something. But what was it? Listen, listen. The scream seemed to last forever. By the time it had finished, half of the gathering raced out into the street in terror. And for the next 30-odd years, the house was haunted, and not just by Esme, although she was regularly seen. Also by a group of black shadows that were far from shy about being seen. In fact, there were about 30 seances held there because something always happened. In July 1834, 28 people held a séance there on Mill Lane, and they all saw a rather fat entity screeching towards them, and they would run out. On the night before Halloween in 1902, the screams from the empty house were so terrifying, the police were called. They broke in, and 2 officers claimed to see shadowy figures racing around. Yet no one was caught nor arrested, because they simply disappeared. On the night before Halloween, in 1946, a séance was held, and the Lady Mary Mitchison, a medium, was clawed across the face, losing an eye. The rest of the group scattered. 3 others were scratched, 1 pushed so hard they were knocked unconscious. The last known séance was the night before Halloween, in 1964, and 8 people were involved. Teresa Bailey, a distant relative of poor dead Esme, brought in medium Simon